I was standing in the hallway outside the private dining room when I heard my name spoken for the first time in 10 years. Not shouted, not mispronounced, said carefully, like it mattered now. The door was half open. I could see him sitting at the table, older, heavier, his suit tighter at the shoulders. He didn't look at me when he spoke. He stared at his plate, at the food I had just sent out. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from the weight of everything I hadn't said back then. The years of being invisible, the meetings I wasn't invited to, the work that carried his company while my name stayed off every door. I realized in that moment that whatever happened next, there was no going back to who we used to be. I joined the company in my early 20s when believing in effort still felt reasonable. I was hired for an entry-level role that barely touched what I was capable of, but I told myself it was temporary. I worked late without being asked. I fixed problems before they became visible. I learned how every department spoke to each other, where things broke down, who carried weight without credit. I thought someone would notice. He didn't. The CEO passed me in hallways like I was part of the wall. When I spoke in meetings, people talked over me, then repeated my idea 5 minutes later with different voices attached. I learned to stop insisting. I learned to deliver results quietly. My performance reviews were polite, vague, safe, reliable, consistent. Words that never opened doors. Years went by. I moved desks. Titles changed slightly, never enough to matter. New graduates arrived, left, returned with promotions somewhere else. I stayed, not out of loyalty, out of stubbornness and fear. I had responsibilities by then, bills, a mother who needed help. I couldn't afford pride. What kept me alive was cooking. I started bringing food to work, first to save money, then because people asked. Lunch breaks became crowded around my desk. I cooked at night, exhausted, focused. Food didn't interrupt me. It didn't dismiss me. It responded honestly. When the company cafeteria shut down during restructuring, I volunteered to organize temporary catering. No one cared who did it. I did. I negotiated vendors, cut costs, kept people fed. Eventually, I stopped outsourcing and cooked myself. Quietly, efficiently, profitable. Still, he didn't see me. Not until years later, when the company needed a private chef for high-level meetings. Someone suggested my name, almost as a joke. I remember thinking, it won't change anything. I'll just do the job. I always do. The first night I cooked for him wasn't dramatic. No music, no announcement, just a quiet request that came through 3 layers of assistance, stripped of names and history. I was told to prepare something impressive but neutral. Food that wouldn't distract powerful people from their own voices. I cooked the way I always had, methodical, restrained, careful not to overreach. My hands moved from memory. The room smelled like heat and patience. I plated each dish myself because I didn't trust anyone else with the details. When it was time, I stepped back into the hallway and waited. That was my place. Always had been. I heard laughter first, then silence. The kind that settles when people stop talking because something has their attention. Plates scraped softly. Someone asked who made this. A pause followed. Too long. Then my name traveled down the hall, uneven, as if it had been sitting unused for years. That was the moment. Not when he tasted the food, not when he approved the menu, but when he asked to meet me afterward, not to thank me, to ask questions. How long I'd been with the company, where I trained, why I'd never mentioned this skill before. I looked at him then, really looked, and I understood something clearly, without anger. He wasn't cruel. He was incurious. He hadn't ignored me out of intention. I simply never registered as worth seeing. I answered calmly. I didn't remind him of the years. I didn't list the roles I'd outgrown. I told the truth in small pieces. I said I'd worked there a long time, that I'd learned by doing, that I cooked because it made sense to me. He nodded, distracted already, and said something about untapped potential. A phrase that landed late. As I walked back to the kitchen, I realized the point of no return had already passed. Not because he finally noticed me, but because I no longer needed him to. After that night, things shifted in ways that looked like progress from the outside. My schedule changed. My badge unlocked new doors. I was asked for menus days in advance, then weeks. Assistants started using my name without checking notes. Someone added culinary lead under my email signature without asking me first. I told myself to be careful. I had learned what visibility cost. The CEO began stopping by the kitchen occasionally. Not often, just enough to be noticed. He'd ask what I was working on, then drift into stories about travel, about meals he'd had in places I'd only seen in books. I listened. I nodded. I kept my hands moving. I never volunteered more than necessary. What I didn't expect was the resentment. People who had never spoken to me before started watching. Some with curiosity, others with something sharper. I heard jokes framed as compliments. Guess we should all bring our hobbies to work now. I felt eyes on my back when meetings ran late and the smell of food carried down the hall. The work itself grew heavier. Private dinners turned into daily expectations, special requests, diets, allergies remembered incorrectly and blamed on me. I stayed later, again. I cleaned my own stations because trust is fragile when it's new. I went home exhausted, hands aching, mind racing with lists. And still, part of me hesitated. He offered me a full-time role, formal, visible, a title that meant something. The compensation was fair, generous even. Everyone said I'd won, that this was my moment. I asked for time, not because I didn't want it, but because I understood the trap. Accepting meant tying the best version of myself to the person who had overlooked me for a decade. It meant being grateful instead of honest. It meant my story would be told as a discovery, not an endurance. In the days that followed, the pressure thickened. The offer sat unanswered. I felt it in the way conversations stopped when I entered rooms, in the careful politeness of messages, in how quickly opportunity can sour when it isn't immediately accepted. One night, alone in the kitchen, I burned a dish. Just slightly, enough to notice. I stood there longer than necessary, staring at it, realizing how tired I was of adjusting myself to fit someone else's timing. The choice wasn't about food, or status, or even him. It was about whether I would continue to rise quietly inside structures that had never made space for me, or whether I would step into the center of my own work and let the consequences land where they may. The decision happened during a dinner meant to impress investors. No ceremony, no speech, just a moment that closed something behind me. I had planned the menu myself, balanced, clean, nothing extravagant. Halfway through service, the CEO came into the kitchen. He stood too close, watching my hands. He said the second course needed to be elevated. Not wrong, just late. The plates were already resting. The timing was tight. I said it would change the rhythm. He smiled. Thin, distracted, the way people do when they're used to being obeyed. He said, "Trust me." Something in me settled. Not anger. Clarity. I wiped my hands slowly. I told him the dish was finished as designed, that altering it now would compromise the balance. I said it quietly, evenly, with witnesses close enough to hear. The kitchen went still. He looked at me as if seeing resistance for the first time, not just from me, but directed at him. He repeated himself, firmer. I didn't argue. I didn't explain. I just said no. Not loudly, not dramatically. Just no. The room held its breath. Then he turned and left without another word. The plates went out unchanged. The dinner was a success. Applause through the doors. Compliments passed along. But something had already broken. The next morning, the offer was withdrawn, reframed as no longer aligned. I was told it was a shame, that I had talent, that I lacked flexibility. I packed my knives that afternoon. No one stopped me. A few watched. One person hugged me quickly, like it was contagious. I left my badge on the counter. 3 months later, I opened my own place. Small, quiet. I cooked every night. Built a reputation slowly, honestly. Years passed. Then, one evening, a reservation came through under a familiar name, a private booking. He sat at the table this time. I stood in the kitchen. He ate what I made. He never asked to change a thing. I don't work the line every night anymore. My hands still know the movements, but I've learned when to step back. The kitchen runs without me hovering. That was the hardest skill to learn, trusting what I built. Sometimes I think about that decade, not with bitterness. More like I'd think about a long winter. It happened. It shaped things. It doesn't get to decide the rest. He never came back after that night. I heard things, of course. People always talk. The company changed. Leadership rotated. Titles dissolved. The world moved the way it always does, indifferent to who once held the door closed. What stays with me are smaller memories. The sound of my knives being packed into a box. The first quiet service in my own place, when no one knew my name yet. The relief of designing something without asking permission. Occasionally, a young woman in my kitchen hesitates before speaking. I recognize it immediately. I stop what I'm doing. I listen, not because she might be right, though often she is, but because being heard should never come as a reward for endurance. This story isn't about revenge. Nothing was taken back. It's about timing and choice. And the moment you realize that rising doesn't always mean being lifted by the same hands that once ignored you. Sometimes it means walking away, carrying your work with you, and letting memory be the only thing that stays behind.